Wednesday night, 6:30 is Generations. We have kids, teens, and there's one in between, right?
It's the same thing.
Okay. They will feed you your kids. Bring your kids. If there's a message here, bring them. Wednesday night at 7 to 8, we're having a young couples group. It's going to be a meet and eat at the church this week. Next week it's going to be in a different place, and that place is to be announced. And next Saturday at 6 p.m. and Sunday at 10:30 a.m. our services. Come join us. See that message? Come. I am. We also have. Okay. So Pastor has been churning butter back in the worship office before service, and he has been anointed with a word for us. So if you would all give us a big old preach, because that's what he does. Welcome, Pastor Errol. Preach!
Praise the Lord. Well, you know, there's two parts to doing the prayer center. One part is coming and one part is going. This is actually the thing that the word of the Lord was given when Moses said, I need somebody to do this for me. When Moses was looking for a replacement, because he was not only getting old, God told him he would not go into the promised land. He said, I need someone who will go out to war and who will come into worship. We measure church typically, and I did all these years too, by how many people come to church. And church on Sunday morning. Today, Sunday morning is totally different than what it used to be. Sunday morning used to be part of the social network of everything we ever did. As a matter of fact, when I was a young minister, some 30 plus years ago, I say that with a... I started in ministry 38 years ago. That's how long. Some of you are like, I'm not even 38 yet. My gosh. Absolutely. In that ministry part, in that season of America, everybody socially was a part of church. Church has changed. And when we built the prayer center, it was about that. It was about understanding that change. So we send and people go, and we come and people come. That's the way it works. And so this is what Moses said. I am looking for a leader who knows to go out and how to come in. How to go out to war and how to come into worship. So that's a very important part of it. Let me ask you, let me say this to you so you know what's going on. Starting in 2 weeks on Sunday morning, 9 to 10 a.m. is a group called Errol Ministries, not Errol Hainer Ministry, Errol, A-R-R-O-W. So last year when I got off the plane in Kenya and I was teaching, the Lord said, I'm sending you like an arrow into this and into a pointed area. And to speak a specific message. I would have ministers many times go, how is it that you're getting to go places that ministers don't typically go? Into the government? Some do, but it's very structured. It's very, it's Anglican, it's Catholic. It's very few that are evangelical or charismatic or anything of that nature. Very few get to go into that. And most of them don't want to because they've said many times, it's because they're corrupt. Well, who more to go to? Who more to go to? And so the Lord said, I'm literally putting you into this like shooting an arrow. I'm doing this. And so he challenged my heart right then to start a teaching and an internship called Errol. And so that's what we're starting. And it starts next 2 weeks from now at 9 o'clock. You can catch us online. You can catch us in person. Or you can catch us on Zoom. Okay? So we'll be in 3 different places. All right. Let me ask you a question. Have you ever met anybody who've had something happen to them and they are just hard? They're hard. I mean, grumpy hard. Careful now, see? What you're talking out your words, all right? Grumpy hard. I mean, maybe it's a grandfather, maybe it's a father, maybe it's an uncle. And you get around him, and I remember an old man that we went into his house, and his wife was super, super sweet. She was just a sweet lady. And inside the door, on their little stand there, as you walked in the hallway of their entranceway, it said, a sweet little lady lives here with a grumpy old man. And wow, talk about a state. And they had that made for their house. What a thing to declare. So you've met people who are grumpy or who have had things happen in their life, and it's not accident. By the way, they don't get there on accident. You don't get to what you're speaking on accident. Nobody does. You get there by the things that have happened in your life, by the pressures that have come on your life, or by the traumas and tragedies that you've gone through, or by the things that have not been healed yet in your life. You declare things. You speak of them. You speak them. You share who you are. You've also met the other person who is extremely positive all the time. Now, I'm going to refer to somebody that comes regularly, and it's Thomas Brown. Thomas Brown grew up in the church, and there for about 8 or 10 years, he was away from church. He was away from all these things. But when he was 17 years old, he was in my internship group. And by the time he was 25, he left until he was about 33 or 4 and had a terrible, terrible car accident. Nearly took his life. While he was in the hospital, he was in comatose situation where they were feeding him, they were taking care of everything, and he was completely in a coma. I said, be careful what you speak. I told Lorraine, they weren't married yet. I said, Lorraine, be careful what you're speaking over him. Because even in this stage, he can spiritually hear what's being said. Though he may not recall it, it has an effect on the heavens around him. And she's like, okay. So we'd go in the hallway when we'd talk about the difficulties of stuff, and I'd say, just speak life over him, speak life over him. And so fast forward about 3 or 4 weeks, and they said, there's nothing more we can do. We're going to unplug the machine, and if he dies, he dies. Okay, now y'all, many of y'all know Thomas. He was on the men's retreat last weekend. He didn't die, right? All right, he didn't die. And so the day that he was going to be unplugged and the machine was going to be turned off and they were going to take out the tubes and just see if he lived, Lorraine called me that morning, and I was in Dallas, and she said, Pastor, they're just going to let him die. His family's all in here, and they're all crying, and what do I do? I said, we declare life over him. We declare life over him. And she says, okay, what do we do? I said, let me just pray with you, and I'll declare life to you. It was about 9 o'clock in the morning. I said, we're just going to pray. God will bring somebody in that will change this whole situation. So as we've been speaking life over him, we're going to pray God sends someone to do the same that changes the whole situation. See, it's lips of life. It's speaking life into a situation that doesn't look good. And so I prayed that with him. They literally got minutes away from unplugging the machine. They came in, prepped everything, said, say your last goodbyes, and everybody's crying and boo-hooing. And I can understand some of y'all been in those situations. I have. And Lorraine said, you would not believe. This doctor walks in and goes, what are y'all doing? And they said, we're saying goodbye, he's dying. No, he's not. We put him in this coma. We put him in this state. We can start taking the medicine down and remove it. Whose orders are to take him off of all this stuff? You see? One person speaking one thing, one person speaking another. This is our prayer, that somebody'd walk in and do this. That was my prayer. Absolutely, as it was spoken, it happened. They started taking the medicine down. He came out of it, and a week later I was there, and he's sitting up talking to me. That's a true story. That's an actual, it took him about 3 months worth of rehab to learn how to walk again because he had been a couple months without walking. But now, I guarantee you meet Thomas. Most people meet him at the Bible bookstore, Mardell's, because he's almost one of the first people you see when you walk in. Nobody more positive in the world right now. He's been that way since 2015. Why? God gave him a new life and a new voice. You know, you can always see somebody come from death to life when their voice changes. They're still the old grumpy No good, everything's terrible. It's a cloudy day all the time. And I'm not talking about positive mental attitude. I'm talking about life-changing happening in who you are. See, your words are pointed all the time. Let me say that again. Your words are pointed all the time. They're pointed. They're pointed up or they're pointed down. There is no in between. You say, well, I sometimes just don't say anything. Then it's pointed down. Typically. I'm not saying it's always down, but I'm saying a lot of times when people are quiet, it's because they have been pressed on and they just want to back off and go, I don't want to engage. If you're not engaging, what are you doing? You're backing down. You have a relationship with God that you're engaging in all the time. Now, that doesn't mean Dina's quiet sometimes. She's quiet a lot of times. I'm the one who's sometimes quiet. They used to say when I was a little boy, I said, if he's quiet, he's either asleep or he's been in trouble. One of the two. Y'all can laugh now. Listen to the words of James. Chapter 3, they're going to have it on the overhead, I believe. James chapter 3, verse 2, for we all stumble in many ways. If anyone does not stumble in word, he is a perfect man, able to bridle the whole body. Indeed, we put bits into horses' mouths that they may obey us, and we turn their whole body. Look also at ships. Although they are so large and are driven by fierce winds, they are turned by a very small rudder wherever the pilot desires. Even so, the tongue is a little member and host and boast great things. See how great a forest a little fire kindles. Wow. That little thing at the end, inside your mouth, that spits out all kinds of things all the time. You know, there are people you absolutely know, you don't have to ask them their opinion because it's going to come whether you ask it or not. Period. You have people like that? Teach them how to prophesy. I'm just being honest with you. Teach them how to prophesy. Because if they're going to open their mouth and keep talking, they at least need to do something that is exhorting, comforting, or encouraging. Okay? Teach them to prophesy. Here's an interesting thing. He says, if you, or for all of us, stumble. You know what stumbling is, right? Stumbling is a simple thing of tripping. Do you know why people typically stumble? Because they're not watching where they're walking. Well, if I looked where I walk all the time, I'd stumble into something, right? But typically it's because we don't pick up our feet and make sure we have clear steps, right? What about in conversation when we stumble? What are we doing here? We're being distracted. We're being coerced or distracted or sidetracked. You see what I'm saying? We're sidetracked. Here's what 1 Peter chapter 5 verse says. It says, trusting the Lord with everything and casting all your distractions. It says cares. That word cares there in the Greek is distractions. Distractions. Anybody had any distractions lately? Of course. You know why? You're serving the Lord, you're doing everything you can do, and you're moving right along, so the enemy's not charging you. He's not trying to get you to do some great sin. He's trying to get you distracted on the simple things that have no real consequence on life or death, but will tie you up for a little while. So I want to take three things here. I want to talk about things spoken over you, observations, so things spoken over you, observations, and then the third one is things you speak. So let's talk about the first one. It's things that were spoken over you. First of all, you need to be breaking things that are spoken over you. Proverbs 18:21 says that the power of death and life are in the tongue, and those who love it eat their fruit thereof. Now, let's get it. Life and death comes out of how you speak. You can either bring somebody up or you can tear somebody down just in a matter of seconds. You know it's easy, and everybody's done it at one point or another, can chew somebody out and chew them up and spit them out. It's pretty doggone simple. You can take a really happy person and make them really sad really quick with your tongue, can't you? And you also know what it's like to come along and find somebody who's really down and give them life and build them up. That's really where the Lord wants us to live. But we know that sometimes in our mouth, we have things that happen because we're pressed on, or we're pushed on, or we're put in a position that's not easy. So it comes out incorrectly. It comes out wrong. And this is one of the great things about having a husband and a partner, because the Bible says this is what the husband gets to do. He gets to build the person up. Well, read Ephesians chapter 5. I'll read it to you here in a minute. I'll shoot it to you here in just a minute. But it says building them up. So sometimes things are spoken over you. From when you're a kid, let's just be honest. Sometimes things happen. Remember I was telling you about, maybe it was your grandfather, your father, an uncle, or somebody who's speaking grumpy all the time? This because of situations that have not been handled or have not been closed or are still lingering in their life. So when another one comes up, he goes, I recognize what that is. I don't want to engage in that, so I'll either shut it down before it happens, or I'll just start pushing against it so it won't come my way. Do you know a person who's usually extremely quiet has got a lot of issues that have never been dealt with? Oh, by the way, a person who's extremely talkative has a lot of issues haven't been dealt with. Extreme. Okay? All right? See, now you're pointing out your cousins, your sister, or maybe the person sitting next to you. You know what I'm saying? I'm just saying. Boy, you're pretty chatty. you're matty chatty here, going on and on and on. It's an incredible thing that Proverbs tells us that a person who opens his mouth too much is considered a fool. It's considered a fool. A person who's quiet doesn't mean that there's not something going on. It just allows nobody to know you don't understand. There are people who don't like to be questioned about anything. I don't know if y'all are that person. I've been that person before. Yeah, you might be that person. I don't like to be questioned about anything. And two reasons typically. Either I've been pressed sometimes and I don't have the answers that quick. You may not process as fast. Or I was the kid who was in trouble a lot. I wasn't a terrible kid or anything like that. I just was always a little mischievous. So they said, what are you doing? Nothing. That was my answer. Don't ask me. Don't ask me. Because I was always into it. I guarantee you. Hey, look, when I was 7 years old, my mom and dad bought a brand new lawnmower. Pulled it out of the box. We mowed with it once or twice. And I decided to take it apart and figure it out. 7 years old. I took it all apart so much my dad couldn't put it back together. And my father said, very good, Errol. So we had to use the old one. That was my brothers and sisters had to use the old one. So did I. And he kept the box. And when we moved, he put it in the box and kept it. We moved again. We moved to Texas. He kept it in the box. When I was 12 years old, there was a class at school, middle school, that was on mechanics on small engines. This is years ago when they used to teach that stuff. I took the class. My dad said, now that you've taken that class, here's the box. Literally pulled the box. I was 12 years old. And he said, put it back together. And I put it back together, and it did work. Now, that's smarts on his side because he didn't waste his money. But that's the kind of mischievous stuff I would get into. My grandfather one time said he was going to paint the rail. So I thought, well, I'll save him the problem. I'll go out and do it. I was probably about 9 or 10 years old. I went out to the barn. I found some black paint because it was black and went and painted it for him. It wasn't black paint. It was tar. True story. It was an oil-based tar. And so I was a kid, 8 or 9. I was interested in everything. They said they was going to paint it. I might as well do it. So he was out in the field, and he comes back in, and he goes, what are you doing? I said, painting. And he looks at it, and he goes, oh, good night. And his worker starts laughing. And he said, what's so funny? He goes, well, that'll never rust. What did I know? I was a kid. I was mischievous. I wasn't, you see? So when somebody would ask me, what are you doing? Nothing. You see? Because I was interested in everything. The smart thing was they got me working on cars and doing other things by the time I was 13, 14 years old. So I had a place to use that energy. Things spoken over us. Let me share with you something. Things that are passed down from parents are passed down to you many times. Okay? I'm talking about things spoken over you. So I was sitting there visiting with Dina about different families, and we do a lot of counseling. I said, why do you think they talk like that? A lot of fear coming out of this. And they said, because it was passed down. I said, you're absolutely right. I just want to see where you came off that. It was passed down. That generation was fearful, so they passed it down to the next generation. And they passed it down to the next generation. And by the time it got to our generation, now, if anything bad happens, God did it. If anything good happens, maybe God did it. But anything bad happens, why does God hate me for this? So you see, the power of life and death is in the tongue. If it's passed down and you're taught, and let me just tell you, growing up, I was taught so much that everything that ever happened was because God chose to put you through it. I was taught that. You say, oh, you weren't taught that in church? I sure was. I absolutely was. I was taught more about what not to do than what to do all the time. Don't do this, don't do that, don't do this. I really, literally, by the time I went to Bible college, I literally knew what I shouldn't do, but I rarely knew what I should do. So I decided to reverse that in my own life. I want to learn what to do in my own life. There are things spoken over you need to break. The reason you think about money, it's been passed on to you normally. The reason you think about marriage is passed on to you. The reason you think about social life, it's been passed on to you. The reason you think about your identity, it's been passed on to you. Look into the Word. The Word gives you who you are. You're a son or daughter of God first. There are some great commercials on TV. Churches have lots of good commercials, and I seen one not too long ago, and the commercial said, I am blank, 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 this church. I'm not going to name the church because you would know it. I am this church. And it kept going around, and kids were saying, I am this church. I am this church. I am this church. And it was a good commercial, but that's not who you are. You're a child of God. I grew up Pentecostal. Well, I have an experience of that. That's not who I am. Some of y'all grew up Baptist. Some of you grew up Catholic. But let's just be honest. When you ask somebody about their relationship with God, they go, well, I'm Baptist, or I'm Catholic, or I'm Pentecostal, or I'm charismatic, or I'm or whatever it is, right? Is that really what they are? No. But we've been taught that so much that that's what's being spoken out our mouth. That's not who you are. Who you are is a child of God. No wonder we have such an identity issue in America. Because even some things that come from the pulpit at different times don't line up with the Word of God. We must be careful. Things spoken over us. Break it. Ephesians chapter 5, verse 8. Remember I told you we're going to hit Ephesians just for a second? Verse 8 says that the man is to be Christ in the marriage. What does Christ do at Ephesians 5:8? Washes his bride with the washing of the Word. What words? The words that proceed out of God. Psalms 119 says, "The Lord, thy word is a light unto a lamp unto my feet and a light unto my path." Right? What's that mean? I will not stumble when I can see the pathway. It's pretty easy to stumble when you don't see the pathway. Have y'all ever gone hiking ever? Man, I love it. So a few years ago, we did a men's retreat up in the mountains. And I took my Jeep. The first thing we did, we got there about 4:30. You know what time the sun goes down in the mountains? About 5:30. I said, we got just a little time to go up 6-8 miles up in the mountains. And we climbed all the way to the top with my Jeep. There's about 4 of us guys. We got up the very top, and it was very nice. It was cool. There was a big lake up there. It's very beautiful. We sat and watched the sun go down on that lake. Took us an hour to get up there, so the sun is going down as we're getting there. Somebody built a fire and left it, and that wasn't very smart. So we went over there and we kindled it up, got it going again, then we shut it down and closed it out. Because we got a phone call. Unbelievable, on top of the mountain, we got a phone call. Hey, dinner's ready. We're eating without you. Now, they had steaks that night, so I was a little more motivated to get back down the mountain. And I realized all I have is my headlights. I don't have any big major lights on my Jeep at this point. All I have is headlights. And so, and there's some places, it's very, very steep, and it's a cliff on one side. So we're riding 6 miles down the mountain, back and forth down trails that are they're just as wide as my Jeep is. If another vehicle's coming, I have to back up and let it go by somehow. And it's rocky and it's nasty. And we work our way down. It took us an hour and a half to get down what took us an hour to get up. Thank God, I was thinking, God, the lights work. I shut the lights off at one point just to see what it do. Now, I wasn't on a cliff, at least at that point. I wasn't that dangerous. And I looked around, and you couldn't see anything for miles. Pull the lights back on. I go, just kidding. I was like, what are you doing? I just want to see how dark it is. It is extremely dark. See, the Lord is my light and my salvation, Psalms 27 says. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the strength of my life. In whom shall I be afraid? When the Lord is leading us, we're not afraid of much. Why? Because He's washing over us with His words and speaking His life into us. So things are spoken over us, and we simply take it in, or we're pressed and we take it in, and you have the ability to break that by saying, Lord, remove this. This isn't me. This is not who I am. I ask you to break it over me. Secondly is observations. Today there's a lot of conversation in the Christian realm that if you speak anything, you're cursing somebody or not. There's observations as well. So sometimes we say things, it's just an observation. It's not speaking a word curse over anybody. It's just an observation. Observations are okay to say. Judgments can be totally different. Out of all the Bible, do you know the one passage that the world knows? And I'm not talking about John 3:16. One passage does the world absolutely know, and they use it like a pistol pulling every single time. Matthew 7. Judge not. And they use the King James Version on it. They never use the Amplified Version or a translation version. So let me read it to you because it's very powerful and it's very strong, and you guys probably have heard it many times. So let me just read it to you so you know exactly what it's saying, because the world, by the way, surprise, surprise, has got it wrong. It says, judge not, or do not judge, that you won't be judged. Here's what it's saying. If you judge, now you have the same eyes looking on you. That's what it's saying. So when I make a judgment, I am putting conversation out and saying, look at that. That's an observation. Most of the time, it's an observation. Now, that observation, that same kind of judgment is used on me. Okay? Right? If you are not allowed, are everybody with me just for a second here? How many of y'all heard that though? Your friends or work members or colleagues have said that. Can't judge, you're a Christian, you can't judge. Right? Have you heard that? You've heard that just like I have, right? Then you cannot make a decision. How many of y'all know Hitler was pretty bad? Would you agree with me? In history, Hitler's one of the worst of all time, next to Herod. Come on, folks. Herod slaughtered thousands of babies at the age of 3 or under. I mean, they were already born. They're already walking around. He slaughtered them. Pharaoh did the same thing. Pharaoh did the same thing. So bring out your little brother, bring out your little sister, particularly little brother. Just saying. He's not made 3 yet, and because of the time that Christ was supposed to be born, let's kill him because he could be the Messiah. That's fear, isn't it? So, would you say that Hitler or Pharaoh or Herod was pretty evil? Yeah. Well, let's go to another side. Mother Teresa. Do y'all know who Mother Teresa of Calcutta is? She's passed away some years now, so some of y'all younger ones won't know who this is. Mother Teresa was a Catholic nun who in Calcutta, as a young woman in the 50s, seen people suffering with boils and with sores in Calcutta, India, and she took it upon herself to help heal them, bandage them. I found out, this was a cool thing. As I was going to Kansas last week, I was talking to one of my best friend's moms. And she texts me, she goes, hey, I have a book from the library that was your sister-in-law's. I think it's cool, it's on angels, it was cool. And I said, that's great, how's the family? Because I hadn't talked to her in a while. And she told me, and I said, I just got back from Africa, blah, 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 fast forward. She said, that's amazing, Jamal, your best friend, is working in Calcutta. I thought, what is she doing in Calcutta? He's working at Mother Teresa's sisterhood, helping with victims there. Wow. I said, isn't it amazing? Two boys who grew up together, who are a little mischievous as boys in a little bitty town in Kansas, are now going around the world healing and ministering to people. She said, that is truly an amazing thing. Why? Because the word's spoken. See, when I was a little boy, I sit on the front row typically, and in a church service one night, a prophetic word was given that somebody here was going to be a minister to speak around the world. And so they lined up all the young teenagers. There's about 10 or 12 teenage boys, and they lined them up, and they went down and prayed for all of them, and my brothers were part of that. And here I am sleeping on the front row, and my mom didn't think to wake me up and be a part of that group. Not one of them became anything of that sort. But here, my mom told me when I went off to Bible college, she goes, you're on the front row, and this is prophetically spoken over you, which is now fulfilled many, many times over. See, what's spoken over you is very important. Now, you know that passage right there, right? So can you make the decision between what Mother Teresa did and what Hitler or Pharaoh or Herod did? Can you make a judgment call there? So you know how to judge then, don't you? So those are righteous judgments, right? If you can't judge, then you can't tell me there's a difference. That's because this is taken out of context every time. Listen to the rest of this. You flip down to verse 15. Beware of false prophets. Do you know what a false prophet is? It's somebody who prophesies to bring destruction when it's not going to be destruction, when God's caused a blessing. Balaam was causing, during the time the children of Israel were wandering, he was going to go curse them, and on the road, his donkey looks up, this is God, his donkey looks up and sees an angel in the road, so he takes a path up by a cliff and starts knocking Balaam up against the cliff. The donkey does. It makes Balaam so mad, you're getting your side crushed. He jumps off, and if you've ever done any equestrian, any horse training or anything like this, a bad habit when you're frustrated is to grab them by the reins and pop them as hard as you can. That is a bad way to do it, but it's very common. I've seen it. So he grabs the donkey by the rope, and he starts to slap him full speed. And the donkey, the second time, says, you going to hit me again? What? Why in the world did you push me up against the rocks? Is what Balaam, I don't know how he got this consciousness. He asked this question, why did you push me up against the rocks? He goes, I seen an angel in the Lord. Did you not see that? Now he's having a conversation with a donkey. He was a false prophet. He was paid to go by Moab to go and curse Israel. And when he got up to curse them, God spoke through him and he blessed them. There were 300 false prophets on Mount Carmel who stood and were going to curse Israel. And God consumed them with fire before Elijah. That's a false prophet, not a wrong one. There are a lot of wrong prophets. Listen to this. Beware of false prophets who come to you as in sheep's clothing, who are inwardly ravenous wolves. You will know them by their fruits. Hitler, Mother Teresa, is their fruits. You will know them by their fruits. You have to make a judgment on this fruit, right? Even so, every good tree bears a good fruit. Every bad tree bears bad fruit. A good tree, listen to this because you don't get this sometimes. A good tree cannot bear bad fruit. Look at your neighbor, if you're saved, and say, you're a good tree. You're a good tree. All right? Now, I want to tell you something that I felt growing up. Listen to this. I felt like I was a good tree that sometimes bared some bad fruit. Hello? Yeah? It's because I didn't know who I was. All right? A bad tree cannot bear good fruit. Turn to your neighbor and say, bad tree can't bear good fruit. Can't bear good fruit. And then he says, every tree that does not bear good fruit should be cut down and thrown into the fire. What is the fire good for? Purifying, cleansing, and warmth. So bad trees wind up being just kindling for warmth. Therefore, by your fruits you'll know them. Whoops. That is actually what the passage says in Matthew 7. It doesn't say you can't judge. It says when you do, be careful because you're going to get judged too. That's all it says. That's a terrible, terrible interpretation. But because the world doesn't want to look at themselves, they say you can't judge. Those are observations. Judgments are totally different. Judgments are literally when you say they're doomed for hell. This is what Jesus says in Matthew 5. Don't call anybody rock up, which means worthless. What do you see when you see a child and somebody says they're worthless? You see a parent who's abusing them with words. It has to be broken. Do you know once it's spoken out their mouth, it's like toothpaste? It's hard to get it back in. Can't get it back in the tube, can you? But you know what you can do? You can wash your hands. You can clean up the mess. You know how you clean up the mess? God, forgive me. God, take this off of me. If you're the one who spoke it, God, forgive me. Break this over my mouth. If you're the one that's been spoken over, God, will you remove this off of me? You say, well, what if they're dead and gone? It still works because it's spiritually spoken before it's physically engaged. What about every idle word? You know, I like to joke a lot. I like to tell jokes. I like to give jokes out. I like to tease. I like to be back. I've always done that. So I had somebody tell me one time, that's every idle word. I said, no, that's not idle word. That's enjoying life. An idle word is using some situation or some position or always slightly saying something behind somebody else's back. So, you know, we get to a place where we're comfortable with what we say, and sometimes you share something and you go, I wish I wouldn't have said that. A couple weeks ago, we were doing some stuff for the funeral, and I said something, and one of my cousins said, you know, that's really their business. I can't believe it came out my mouth. Forgive me, Lord, forgive me. I shouldn't have said that. I said to him, and he goes, you know, he say that. I go, I cannot believe I. See, it happens to all of us. Coarse jesting is what Titus says. Be careful of those things. I'm not putting something on. Idle words are putting something on somebody else and seeing if it'll take. Do you know what the enemy's doing all the time with you? He's throwing lots of conversations out to see if it'll take. 2 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 5 tells us the weapons of our warfare are not carnal. They're not physical, but they are mighty through God. They're spiritual, bringing down strongholds and casting down vain imaginations. Do you know the Lord gives us the ability to take every thought captive? It says it right there in verse 5. You get to take every thought captive and make it obedient to Christ. So I've got words coming from the enemy and words coming from the Lord all the time in my mind. You and I have the choice to do something about it. All right, so I grew up hearing this. If you had anything difficult come in your mind, you're sinning already. Did y'all grow up that way? I did. If it comes into your mind, you've already sinned. Has to do with what Jesus says about temptation. It's totally different. If it came into my mind, is it fair to me that I don't take and have the ability to destroy it and I'm just sinning already? So I grew up with hearing, you're a sinner, 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 because of what was put. The enemy constantly puts things in your mind. Now that I know who I am, When it comes in, I also hear the voice of the Lord. Do this, do this, do this. So there's a playing field right here. And I get to choose do this or do this. Are you following me? And the more I choose what the Lord has given me, the more I understand it. For you that are young, do you know your mom's voice? See, I'm older now. My mother's gone. She's in heaven. I know my wife's voice very well. I didn't say I always responded to it. She's watching. She'll watch this later, and this will prove whether you watch my sermons or not. This is a test. There'll be a testimony later. I know my wife's voice. My wife can pick out every one of our grandchildren, even if they're in a group, which one got hurt, which one screamed. I can't. I go, is there any blood? Oh, we're good then. Suck it up, let's go. That's a man. But a woman hears those things. As she is in tune with the children, I'm in tune. I can really hear what she's saying 99% of the time. 94. Anyway. Honestly, I had to put the right measurement on her. Is the game on? All right, so anyway, the right measurement. And here's the amazing thing. I'm so attuned to hearing her voice that if another woman tried fooling me, it wouldn't be her. I know it. I know it. It wouldn't be her. So if another mother tried fooling you to get you to do something, you know it, right? You know. If the enemy tries to fool you with another voice that's not God's, sounds a little bit like God's, but it's not God's, you have the ability, according to the scripture, to challenge it against his own very words. Make it obedient to his own words. If it looks like, smells like, acts like Christ, then it is. Then it is. Words are pointed. Lips of life, or you live in a tongue of trouble. You're speaking it over yourself all the time. You're speaking it over yourself all the time. How many people you know that say, I'm just sick? And they take that on as their mantra. Man, the world is making billions of dollars off of people who constantly claim they're sick. Who doctors give them a pill and then they get a symptom because that pill causes a symptom. Before long, and I'm not talking about people that are literally legitimately having issues. I'm talking about there's a lot of medicine that comes off of stress. 80% of medicine comes off, 80% of the medical field comes off of stress, according to doctors. Not according to Errol, according to doctors. Right? Stress. Willful words. The last part of this, I said we're going to talk about things spoken over you, things you observe, and then things you speak. Willful words. Declarations over your life. When I was a kid, my dad would every once in a while say, she's a hypochondriac. We don't use that word much anymore. You know what that word means? She's always sick with something. Always down. Always needs something. My favorite Andy Griffith of all time is one of the very first years when this little old lady goes to the drugstore and it's not open yet, and Andy opens the door for her, and she's going to get her pills. And then the new druggist comes out and says, what are you doing? Stealing something? He said, no, I'm just getting the pills for her. Where's your prescription? She was getting a placebo from the druggist every day or every week. She'd give a dime for it. She'd get placebos. If you don't know what a placebo is, it's a sugar pill. That's all it was. But every time she got that sugar pill, she felt so much better. So my dad we would go visit somebody, and we'd get out in the car and go, I was just a kid, I didn't know any better. Why are they always sick? Because they're hypochondriac. See, you and I can laugh about that. It was true. I need you, so I'm going to speak it into existence to make you need me. We need to declare over our lives. When I learned about declaring over our lives, I was probably in my late 20s, and our girls were real little. You need to be declaring over yourself and over your families. How do I change this situation? See, James chapter 3, verse 11 says, does a spring send forth both fresh water and bitter water from the same opening? Can a fig tree bear olives or grapevine bear figs? Thus no spring yields both salt water or fresh water. Which would you rather drink out of? A clear bottle of water or a muddy bottle of water? A clear one, right? The only thing you do with the muddy one is pour it on your flowers. What happens when somebody is willfully speaking things and they're a tongue of trouble all the time? You hate being around them. You actually avoid them. And when you have to go see them, you're like, well, and then you tell all your friends that you went and seen such and such because they all know that that person is constantly downing and destroying and just with their words, everybody's no good. And you avoid them. And it makes for a sad life, doesn't it? You can change that. You can change that by willful words of declarations. We started speaking things over our children when they were real young. We'd hold them and we'd pray for them and we'd rock them and we'd speak things over them. And some of y'all have done the exact same thing. Don't stop speaking over your children. What if they're grown? Don't stop speaking over your children. My youngest daughter, just this last spring, turned 24. Right? My oldest is 31. We have 9 grandchildren. We hold them up, we pray over them, we speak over them every time we have them. On the men's retreat, we just finished this last weekend. I said, before we're done with morning teaching, I want you to give me a bad thing and a good thing that happened. Everybody went around and was sharing, this was what difficult, this was what was good. You know how many times we had much more good stuff than difficult? Every day. A lot more good things. Why? Because the bad things we'll pray about and we'll move on. The only bad things we could think of is Jimmy had to go home early and Wayne couldn't go. Those are the only 2 bad things really we could think about. So we prayed about them. So the bad things you pray about. The good things you bless. So I'm going to ask you to do something. I'm going to ask you to bless today. Let's break some of these things. And maybe you've been the person, this was a tough week. I don't know if you've had a lot of pushback lately. I have. Welcome to the real world of serving the Lord. If you wake up, you're going to have pushback. I had somebody not long ago say, I think the devil's doing this. And Jimmy and I even talked about that the other day. But I have a friend that was doing some ministry and goes, I think the devil's really against me. By the way, every moment you wake up, he's still there. He's messing with you, trying to mess with you every day. Every single day. Can I get you to stand with me? We're going to make a declaration together. Then we'll finish up with a little worship. And this is a declaration we hadn't made in a while. But it's saying something about who you are. So would you say it with me as we say it together? I am powerful. Hold on, let me say it again because I know that about 2 of you were with me. I am powerful, and what I believe changes the world, so today I declare, God is a good Father. He loves me all the time. Nothing can separate me from His love. Jesus' blood paid for everything, and I'll tell the nations of what He has done. I am important, and how He made me is amazing. I'm designed for worship. My mouth establishes praise to silence the enemy. Everywhere I go becomes a perfect health zone, and with God, nothing is impossible. Let me say that again. And with God, nothing is impossible. Say that again one more time. And with God, nothing is impossible. You're right. Amen. Come on, let's worship.
Sing it's time. It's time for the sleeper to wake. It's time for the old winds to change. I hear the Spirit say it's time. shine.